Namaskar. So what is deep state's economic strategy? What has been happening? To understand this, we'll need to go back in time, way back in the 1940s. Remember that Bretton Woods agreement where the United States dollar was supposed to be the reference and it was backed by gold that the United States possessed. And then in 1971, what happened? We all know. Richard Nixon, the then president, took it off of the dollar and it became a fiat currency. Who was the national security advisor at that time? Henry Kissinger. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about all this and also how Bharat is going to be countering this and also, in fact, thrive amidst all this uncertainty. So please do watch this thing till the very end and like this video. I have a small slide deck for you, and this will explain to you in great detail what has been going on. I'm not saying that this is going to happen in probably my lifetime, but this is something that perhaps you can look back and see, okay, this is something that was predicted by a few people, and that's what I have for you. Thanks to Mr. Kannan Ramasamy for giving the basic research. We have got a lot of links for you to take a look at it because this may be a little bit too much to absorb on the first viewing. You can watch this thing more than once just to get to understand all the details. Here we go. So what is the deep state's economic strategy? Remember that Henry Kissinger is considered one of the most influential leading lights of the deep state, and he passed away recently at the ripe age of 100. But in the 60s and 70s, he was the person who was pretty much the face of the administration, whether it was Nixon or his successor, Gerald Ford. From 69 to 75, that is 1969 to 1975, Henry Kissinger was the national security advisor for the United States, and he was also the Secretary of State from 1973 to 1977. Even after Richard Nixon demitted office, he was the Secretary of State for Gerald Ford also. That tells you something, isn't it? They never changed the NSA as well as the Secretary of State, even though a big change in the president took place. That tells you how much of power he wielded. Brilliant guy, born in Germany, and he was a Jew, and he left in 1938, came to Harvard, was brilliant, and then he never looked back. But of course, he could not become the president of the United States because he was not born here. Therefore, he rose to perhaps the highest possible rank he could as Secretary of State. Now, how many things did they devise? They first devised the economic model. You know how he went and opened the doors for the United States in China in the 70s. And also, they enforced this thing called the SWIFT, which is a system that will ensure that between countries, it is the only way you can transfer money. Although now there are countries finding their way around this, and I'm going to talk about that also. Now, in the 1944, remember that Bretton Woods happened. Then after that, in the 50s, the United States persuaded, arm wrestle, whatever you want to think of, persuaded the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to take dollars for its petrol. At that time, KSA was one of the biggest producers of crude, and once KSA signed up, the other countries followed suit. That's how the petrodollar came into being. And once the petrodollar came into being, it became the reserve currency. 1944 was already there, but with petrodollar in 1950, slowly and steadily, everybody started dealing with the dollar. In fact, I was recently in Cambodia, and I could buy anything I wanted in dollars, except when I went very remote areas. There you had to buy using the Cambodian currency. But as far as cities were concerned, you could use dollar to essentially interchangeably use it. Now, as time progressed, 50s and 60s and so on, the US was positioned as the only accepted currency for global trade transactions, making it indispensable. Now, countries were compelled to use the SWIFT system because as commerce grew, you needed to have a way to transfer money from one place to another. And also remember, all these oil-rich countries, they formed a cartel called OPEC in 1973, and then everybody started seeing the pinch of a stronger crude, and that, inflation went through the roof. Every country suffered, including the United States. I'm curious as to how Henry Kissinger did not stop the OPEC from forming. I mean, he was one of those guys who could smell something like this a mile away. Be that as it may, the OPEC put a huge crimp, and then all these oil-rich nations became extremely rich. But since they all were using USD, US dollar, as their currency, the money they were making, they were encouraged to come to the United States and park it there. Ergo, now you see, whether it is Manhattan in New York City or London, much of the most wealthy real estate is owned by who? Arab sheikhs. Now, as the US moved away and became the fiat currency in 1971, if I remember correctly, then what happened was there was no limit against which the US dollar had to be pegged. Once you took the dollar off of the gold peg, it could print as much currency as it wanted. And that's what ended up happening. Now, this also meant that it could quietly and subtly shift its debt from itself to other countries. Why? Because the financial system in the United States was very good. The stock market was very good. Everybody who was having a lot of dollars for, say, selling petrol, they were encouraged to come in and invest in US. The system was good. Everybody made money. And initially, all the sheikhs made money hand over fist. Now, this has been working for many years. In fact, 50 plus years, until something happened. Well, what was that something? It is alleged that the deep state began engaging in the trade of terrorism. The US was able to afford high salaries and maintain a high standard of living because of the fiat USD. But because of this, limitless credit available to you by way of plastic, meaning credit cards, the US started spending way beyond what they could earn. Today, we have this ridiculous situation where buy now, pay later is a new system that is being introduced in the United States for the last few years, post-COVID especially, where even things like airline ticket, you could buy it in 4 installments. That's ridiculous. I mean, people are saying that you could buy a bottle of whiskey for $40 over 4 installments, pay $10 every month. So this is a new paradigm that is about to crumble. I don't know when it will crumble, but this is something that is looking really, really dangerous. But because of these kinds of credit cards and financial instruments, the US is spending much more than what it can afford. So what happened then was the countries like, manufacturing countries. Initially, it was Japan. Then Japan became too expensive. Then manufacturing went to Korea. Then Korea became very expensive. Then it went to Taiwan. Taiwan became very expensive. Now you are seeing that it is in China. China is also becoming expensive. Unfortunately for the US, China is a much bigger country compared to all these island nations. So now what it's seeing is China has not only backed up its reserves, it is actually able to cock a snook at the United States. So this is the huge problem for the US. Now, because of the competition, like say, if you're becoming too expensive, you go to the next cheaper one, and so on. The prices were kept at the lowest possible level and the US consumer benefited. In fact, the US consumer benefited so much that, they didn't look back. The United States has built up a massive debt, while other countries are forced to remain silent and comply as they could not lose access to the United States markets because there was no other alternative. Nobody else had the kind of money that the Americans had, that I had as a US resident and citizen. Now, this was used very effectively by the deep state to pressure nations into compliance. I'll give you an example. 2017 to 2021 till January 19th, it was Donald Trump who was the president, and he did put a tariff, but the prices did not go up on the street. How did the Chinese manage? China was the one that had the bulk of the tariff imposition. How did they manage? They found ways to cut corners in their production price. And likewise, even now, if tariffs are imposed on countries, they are going to find a way to cut their internal costs and still be at the same price as what US used to get from before, because it's the market. If they can't do it, somebody else will find a way to do it. Now, this gave the leverage to the deep state that gave them the power to impose what is called as New World Order. What is the New World Order? One country, one standard, one set of rules. No, countries like US, Canada, this, that, everything same. Anybody can live anywhere you want. All that stuff is, a matter of utopian dreams, but that's exactly what the deep state wants. Now, depending on who you talk to, China holds $1 to $3 trillion in US Treasury bonds, making it a major stakeholder in the US market. But can it dump all that? And if it dumps it, what is it going to do with the dollars? That's a big question. And if it doesn't have it, how is it going to get the raw material? So these are all the other problems. Nobody wants to sell or take Chinese yuan in exchange for the products that they sell. You need to still pay in US dollars. For example, if you want something to be bought from India, if you want to import something from China, the company in India needs to pay in dollars. Many of us don't know this. So what happens is everything goes through this Hong Kong, which is where there is the transfer going on, US to Hong Kong dollar, then Hong Kong dollar to yuan. And this process of getting anything through China, paying for it in US dollars, is through the Hong Kong conduit, is what makes it so powerful. Still, Hong Kong is still the one that I would look at as a country or an area which, once the US takes the Hong Kong dollar US peg, then a lot of things will break loose. But that will also hurt US. That's why US is not doing it. So this entanglement between US and China is so strong that neither country can afford to destabilize the other without suffering the consequences itself. Now, then what happened? The COVID-19 pandemic. This was allegedly, again, we are still trying to find proof for that, a DS plot to end the way system was. But contrary to deep state's expectations, it awakened many countries such as India, such as Russia, and many Middle Eastern countries, where they said, wait a minute, why do we need to use dollars to purchase from each other when neither of the countries have US as its currency? So that's why you're seeing this scheme. That's why the deep state is pissed off at UPI, because UPI has become extremely popular, especially in many countries that are dealing with people working from India. Because now they can say, for example, they can accept rupees for their petrodollars and then pay their India-based employees or India origin employees working in their countries in the rupees. That way the rupee gets a way to get cycled back into the system. Contrast that with Russia, where Lavrov was complaining that I'm sitting on 10 billion worth rupees. What am I going to do with it? Well, Russia needs to find a way to pay for its services in rupees. Once it does that, no problem. For example, if Russia does transactions with Iran, maybe it can pay for it in rupees because Iran needs rupees. I mean, I'm just giving one possible solution for Russia because it deals with both. Now, what is also happening? Slowly but steadily, everybody is realizing that their currency has value against the dollar only if it is pegged against a commodity that was the reference for the longest time, gold. So many countries are trying to do this thing. Of course, we saw that BRICS was trying to do that, and Trump has threatened left, right, and center, and I think that might be temporarily on hold, but I don't know how long it's going to be on hold. This is the one thing that could really hurt US, because once this dependence on dollar goes on, it is believed that 65 to 70% of the dollar is not used within United States, but it is used outside of United States. Like I said, how currencies are getting transacted. So once that starts going down, for example, UAE to India is also happening in rupees. Some of these things would cause a drop in the usage of the United States dollar. And that time, what will happen is US will start seeing a flood of its own currency, which was outside of US, coming back into it. And that will mean that there are a lot more dollars chasing a lot fewer goods. Inflation will go up, and this would have a huge problem. I mean, one way it will show up is that the US will have to devalue its currency from that 90 plus, 85 plus for rupee to maybe 75, gradually bring it in down and making it more in line with what the exchange rate should be. Today, there is a very complicated basket of currencies and blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's going to stand for too long. All this stuff was happening before Trump came along. What is Trump trying to do? Trump is trying to counter this trend and preserve the economic independence or dominance of the United States by enforcing hegemonic trade tariffs and sanctions under a nationalistic approach. He is further alienating Europe and other countries from the US. Why Europe, you ask? What is happening in Europe? Europe was forced to buy crude from people that were much more expensive than Russia, right? It didn't have a choice. It was asked to support the Ukraine effort. All these things is making Europe nervous. Now what you're seeing is the Europe is on the cusp of completely breaking down. Germany is in trouble, France is in trouble, UK is in trouble. So many of these engines are beginning to shut down because the costs of running the country, keeping up all their domestic programs, welfare programs, is taking a huge hit on the shrinking tax base of all these countries. Very few people are paying taxes, and they are taking a much bigger burden. So all these things will make Europe look at US with more and more suspicion. But I don't know if Europe really has an alternative, short of creating some sort of a work order structure where they can get good, reliable workforce from countries like India on a 5-year contract or something like that. And that would basically stabilize their system, because they can essentially get services for cheaper, at the same time be able to have no population explosion or all the other unrest that is happening because they chose to bring people who were not even moved 30 kilometers out of where they were living into their countries, and now they are seeing the disastrous consequences. But first, they'll have to clean house. Do they have the money for that? That's a big question. So all these points to the biggest opportunity that exists for Bharat to be able to become a global force in especially making or leveraging its manpower and making sure that wherever there are demands, it can supply the workforce. We are already seeing that happening with Israel, and we are also seeing that happen with Taiwan, but other countries will follow suit. So what is the approach that the RSS want, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, and what the BJP want? There are slightly different approaches. The RSS wants to emphasize domestic consumption over exports, advocating for self-sufficiency. Why is this important? That means that you are self-contained. You are producing for your own consumption. You are not too much reliant on external influences. On the other hand, BJP sees an opportunity that, look, our products are in much demand in other countries such as Southeast Asian countries, African countries, and so on. So why not increase exports to these countries and thereby get foreign exchequer and thereby funnel your own growth? So both are good, compelling strategies. However, I don't know when the two will meet, and I'm not so sure how much RSS can exert by way of influence over BJP to have the party toe its line. Swadeshi is good, but we still need a lot of fundamental building blocks before we can call ourselves Swadeshi. So who's going to win? Domestic focus or export-driven growth? Well, we don't know, but I think a combination of two will happen. And as the export-driven growth starts tapering off, I would expect the domestic focus to go up, so that there's a balance that is achieved that will kind of make it easy for India to not be shocked by external events. Thanks to Sri Kannan Ramaswamy for all the research he did for this project, and there are lots of reference links. Please take a look at it. I'm just trying to give you a big picture of what the deep state wants. I don't think you can wish it away. It's not going to go away. However, Trump is making a huge difference, but I don't know how much it will really play out in the long term. We have to wait and see. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Namaskar.